During those 6 years after I'd returned to LA from Connecticut, apart from all the writing and film projects I mentioned, I was also involved in giving feedback to writers on their screenplays and editing non-fiction books. One day, I was having lunch with my talent manager friend, Judy Foggs, and she began to tell me about her father's experiences during World War II. "Oh, it would make a great script," she exclaimed. This is a very common refrain in Hollywood. Everyone and his uncle have a script that's bound to be a blockbuster movie. The truth is, a very small percentage of scripts actually get made into films. I think around 3% of those submitted. Of course, Judy knew this, but I said I'd love to meet with her father and hear his story. Diminutive and a little bent over, 86-year-old Dr. George Fox graciously welcomed me into the home he shared with his wife Grace. He was suffering from macular degeneration, so his eyesight was impaired, but it wasn't immediately apparent. As an Orthodox Jew, he wore a yarmulke, a kind of cap, on his head to signify great respect for the Jewish faith. After we'd shared tea, I began to ask George about his life. I wanted to know what he was like as a boy. As he recalled his childhood and then his teen years, his involvement in sport and so on, I saw this small man grow before me. He became the boy, the teenager, and the young man. He not only had an amazing memory for detail and characters, but he was also reliving every moment of his life and getting excited about his experiences and the people who'd shaped him. It was so uplifting for me, but a joy for George. By sharing his memories with me, he was validating his existence and acknowledging the difference he'd made in so many lives. The World War II experience his daughter Judy had mentioned was indeed heroic, but not in a traditional combat sense. In fact, George never saw combat and spent the majority of the war travelling to somewhat exotic locations such as Dakar, Casablanca, Cairo, and Tripoli. He often repeated how fortunate he felt when so many of his friends were being killed or injured in Europe. Yet George did not shy away from dangerous situations. He worked in the Graves Registration Department and was assigned to go to the Jebel Akhdar Mountains in Libya, where several American planes leaving air bases in South America and Dakar had crashed en route to Europe. When this happened, apparently the Muslim Arabs would retrieve the bodies of the dead airmen and mutilate them. George told me what they did, but I won't describe that here. Naturally, the US military wanted to be able to ship the bodies back to the States, so it was deemed necessary for someone to negotiate with the Arabs to get the bodies back intact. Because George had knowledge and respect for the customs of the North African natives and had learned quite a bit of the language, he was chosen to impersonate an Arab. His account of passing himself off as a Turkish-American Muslim and being met by native soldiers on horseback firing their rifles into the air in celebration of George's visit is indeed worthy of a film. He and the 2 GIs that accompanied him handed gifts of tobacco and giant cans of Coca-Cola to the Emir, who was middle-aged and fairly nondescript, except that he was dressed elaborately and lived in a sumptuous cave. George himself was treated like a prince. He was wined and dined, entertained with horse-riding exhibitions, and then given a traditional robe to wear and was put on a horse. So there I was, a Jewish kid, playing the role of an Arab and getting away with it," he laughed. "Oh, it would have been great if someone had taken photos," I said. "Oh, they did," he exclaimed excitedly. Oh my goodness, where are they, George?" "Oh, they're around here somewhere, probably in a shoebox under the bed." Well, of course, that's where most people kept their photos in the old days. Judy had the assignment of searching for these very special photos, which were indeed in a shoebox under George and Grace's bed. Oh, it was extraordinary to see these amazing black and white photos of Soldier George surrounded by his Arab friends, eating sheep's eyes, riding a horse, and generally having a good time. He was also able to reach a mutual cooperation where the Arabs agreed that a team of GIs from Graves Registration could retrieve the bodies of the downed airmen and ship them back to the US. George became a teacher in a segregated part of Virginia, where both he and his wife experienced racism firsthand, which was extremely upsetting for them both. Later, when he was teaching in California, he was bold enough to hire 2 black female teachers. "They called me the Abraham Lincoln of education," George said with pride, and said that I had freed 2 slaves. All I know is these 2 women were excellent teachers. You know, I could go on and on about this lovely man who for 40 years was a revered child psychologist, recognizing the potential in all children, especially those with learning and behavioral problems, as well as those with disabilities. I was so happy to be able to put George's stories into a book with relevant photos as a tribute to this man's wonderful life and a legacy for his family. I gave it the title, A Fortunate Life, since Dr. Fox repeated this phrase so often. However, I really felt that I was the fortunate one. He changed the direction of my life. He helped me recognize that every life has a value that needs to be acknowledged, as well as preserved for future generations. And of course, sharing stories is such a cathartic and healing experience. So I decided that helping people write their life stories was to be the next part of my journey. I became a member of the Association of Personal Historians and met wonderful people who were passionate about saving a life, as they put it. Because that's exactly what they were doing, by giving ordinary people an opportunity to talk about their experiences and their achievements. To sit at the knee of a grandparent and hear stories of times gone by certainly seems like a thing of the past. Consequently, often our parents and grandparents die with their stories still inside, and we're left with so many questions. Yet those stories make up the fabric of a rich and textured life and can give insights into our own existence. Knowing where we came from is not just about being able to put together a family tree. It's about the value of the lives on that tree. To quote Mark Twain, "There was never yet an uninteresting life. Such a thing is an impossibility. Inside of the dullest exterior, there's a drama, a comedy, and a tragedy." Whether recorded in audio, on film, or published in a book, every person's life needs to be validated and a lasting legacy for those left behind. I've gained enormous pleasure from working with people of all ages on memoirs and life stories, which in their way have been extraordinary. Mainly because I've seen the difference it can make when we're allowed to share who we are. In 2012, after close to 40 years away, I made the decision to return to Coventry to spend more time with my 87-year-old aunt, Barbara. Although she didn't want me to record her stories, she enjoyed talking about her childhood and her accomplishments as a singer. I learned more about my deceased mother's childhood, as well as her aspirations to be a Hollywood star, which was news to me. If only I'd known about my mother's early life, I feel it would have improved our difficult and unhappy relationship. By leaving California and returning to England, I've really come back to me. Or to quote T.S. Eliot, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to